Hi and welcome to this bite-sized video on making the difference for GCSE Maths. This video is focused on making progress from grade 7 to grade 8.
So I think it's just useful to look at kind of performance across a whole paper and look at some general themes by grade. For our grade 8 students, they're typically getting full marks throughout the first half of the paper, and they're dropping to below half marks on average only in those most challenging 2 or 3 questions, and they're consistently scoring really well and making good progress into those challenging multi-step questions towards the end of the paper. So on screen here, we can see some of the key areas where we see a really distinct difference in student performance at grade 8 compared to grade 7 students at higher tier. So this has been taken by looking through all the performance on past June series and looking at some general themes there as to where we see those big differences occurring. So we've got harder surds, so that's anything where they've got to do that harder rationalising the denominator, so where they're multiplying by the complement, or maybe they have to do something a bit more challenging, such as maybe raising an expression that involves surds to a power. Ratio, these questions that involve some form of algebraic ratio are a really good differentiator of performance at these top grades. So you might well remember from the June 2024 most recent series that there was that question where students were given some ratios, a couple of different bags, and then they were asked to show that the total number of counters across the 2 bags was equal to 4x. And this question was a really key differentiator of grades in that grade 7 to 9. So grade 7 students scored on average 34% of the marks. Grade 8 students, that goes up to 63%. And for grade 9, their average was at 88%. So how students do on that type of question is a really good indicator of what kind of grade they are currently working at and looking to come out with in the exam. In terms of our algebra, I'm kind of classing this as like coordinate geometry style questions because they're really quite similar in nature to the kind of questions we'd see in year 12 actually, quite often involving lines, circles, tangents, normals, those kind of things. Finding the turning point of a quadratic by completing the square. Translations and reflections of functions are also kind of key areas. And then in the geometry section, vectors crops up quite a lot, as does 3D trig, but it's really just a bit of a mixed bag of just the hardest questions. And again, with probability, it's anything where they're giving something in an algebraic context to deal with. So a lot more challenging. They're a really key differentiator of skills at that level. So just on screen, a couple of examples, really handy just to see those of the types of questions where we do see those big performance differences. So on the left-hand side, we've got an example of the kind of coordinate geometry question that I'm talking about. And then on the right, we've got a vectors question. So you can see the performance differences there. Grade 8 students performing much more successfully on that vectors question than their grade 7 counterparts. So this is something grade 8 students can do really quite well. It's probably on this more simple end of a vectors question when they do have to start doing anything that's more complicated. So maybe proving that some points are collinear or that 2 different vectors are parallel. That's something that even grade 8 students are struggling to get that much further with, and those harder vector questions are more a differentiator for grade 9. So looking at resources that are going to help you students working at this level, of course, we've got our theme practice papers by topic, and on screen there, we've just identified some of the key topic areas of those papers that would be good for students working at this level. The coordinate geometry ones are really nice. They build up to some really challenging questions. It starts off quite straightforward, but there's definitely a big ramp up in challenge there. Also, again, I'll always mention calculator use. So our grade 8 students, we should be using their calculators really fluently and efficiently. But I think it's really worth incorporating that checking with calculator into all practice. So in every single lesson, so that they're really establishing those good calculator skills and that routine checking of solutions. So what we're talking about here is obviously substituting values back into an equation, using the table function to check the nth term of a quadratic sequence that they've worked out, converting their fraction to a decimal to check their answer to a recurring decimal question. So all of these kind of checking processes to make sure that they don't drop any marks that they really don't need to, particularly important working at this level. We also have a set of aiming for grade 8 practice papers. These are 40-minute tests with student-friendly mark schemes, so they're kind of perfect to do and mark in one lesson. Another great resource to use with students, particularly in that last little bit of exam preparation, lead up to the exams, are our exemplar materials. So obviously for your students targeting grade 8, we'd maybe just be looking at the questions in the late teens and the 20s, those ones right at the back end of the paper. And you can use this as a follow-up to the students having attempted these questions in a mock, or getting them to attempt the questions in class for the first time. We can then talk about, well, what do we think the 5 marks on this question are going to be for? Can we predict the mark scheme? Then let's mark the questions. We can discuss the examiner commentary, and then get the students to essentially become the examiner themselves. So give them the exemplar student responses. These are taken from real life scripts. They're examples of different student responses, and get them to apply the mark schemes. How would they mark them? What do they think that student did well? What do they need to do better? Have they given them the mark? Why? If not, why not? What else did they need to do? Really develop that deeper understanding and that discussion. Great activity to get them working in small groups together. If you really want to consolidate and boost that learning, then I'd have the students then individually follow that up by having a go at the associated question from the shadow papers. So now can we really put into practice what we've learned to come up with a really great solution to the associated shadow question. Now, one of my key recommendations for students aiming that grade 7 to 9 region is our extended math certificate. So to use those resources, to use the absolutely amazing assessment materials, banks of questions that we have for this new qualification to help support and really stretch and challenge your students working at that level. This is a whole other bank of resources that are available to you to use to support your students either with EMC or just in their GCSE higher, to really develop a much deeper understanding and to much higher level problem solving skills. So there are some topic practice papers. These include walkthrough videos as well. And some of the key ones that I've picked out there are on quadratic functions. That includes loads of practice on turning point for harder quadratics, transformations of functions. Just be aware that stretches are included in EMC and they're not included in GCSE, so you can kind of ignore those, but there'll be some really nice little questions in there you can snip out to use in your work on transformations. And then obviously Pythagoras and trig, the probability and the vectors work. So a lot more practice of those most challenging topics working at kind of grade 8, grade 9 level. This video is part of your subject advisor support from Pearson. I'm Vicky, your subject advisor for Maths and Statistics, and you can get in touch with me in all the ways that you can see on screen there.